I used to believe my life was built on the strongest foundation: love, trust, and honesty from the person I chose to spend my life with. 6 years together, never a shadow of doubt, never a warning sign. We had plans, dreams for a future filled with happiness, including the hope of starting a family when my wife turned 30. I trusted her, not just as my wife, but as my soulmate, my partner through every joy and struggle. Then one day, everything came crashing down. My stepbrother, someone I once called family, walked into our home as a guest, but slowly tore apart the most precious pieces of my marriage. A terrible secret unfolded. She was pregnant, but not with my child. When I asked for answers, for proof, her denial cut deeper than any blade could. From that moment, darkness enveloped everything. Angry silences, sleepless nights filled with doubt, endless fights that went nowhere. I lost her, my trust, and the peace I once had in my heart. But the story doesn't end there. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the video. When I look back now, it almost feels like a lifetime ago, the early days of our relationship, full of hope and promise. We met at a work event years before, just two friends laughing, sharing stories, unaware of what was waiting ahead. For those first few years, everything felt effortless. She was fantastic, smart, beautiful, and someone I genuinely wanted beside me through every chapter of my life. We laughed, planned, and dreamed together, as if nothing could ever shake what we had. But beneath all that joy, I didn't realize there were subtle tensions we never talked about. She was younger, often hesitant about rushing into things like marriage or kids. I admired her clarity on what she wanted, waiting until she was ready to start a family. But inside me, that impatience quietly simmered. It wasn't anger exactly, more like a quiet yearning I kept locked away. Sometimes, I wondered if waiting would change how our lives would unfold, or slowly drift us apart. Our families added their own layers to this delicate balance. My dad remarried when I was a teenager, bringing Darren, my stepbrother, into the fold. Darren was a whirlwind, unpredictable, reckless, but still family. My wife adapted to him in her own quiet way, showing kindness I never expected. At first, it seemed like we were building a larger, extended family full of warmth. But even then, there were moments I caught myself feeling protective, sometimes unsettled around Darren's chaotic energy. Despite the uneven rhythms beneath the surface, we settled into a routine that felt safe. Weekends spent cooking together, quiet evenings watching old movies, sharing hopes about the future. I convinced myself that love alone could navigate any storm. I'd stand in the living room watching her cook dinner, her smile soft, and think, this is home. I was ready to start a family, to make those dreams real. Though I kept those wishes as our secret for a little longer. But life, as I've learned, has a way of unraveling even the tightest threads. The day Darren came to stay with us, his sudden arrival at my apartment, felt more like a favor than a threat. My dad and stepmom asked me to give him a chance, and against my better judgment, I relented. I told my wife first, and she said she was okay with it. Even then, a quiet knot of unease settled in my chest. Darren's past wasn't spotless. His impulsive, reckless decisions haunted him, and I'd seen too many times how easily he spiraled. But I wanted to believe in the good, believe that maybe this time it would be different. The first days were manageable. Darren kept mostly to himself, going out late, sometimes not returning until morning. My wife and I joked about it, tried to ignore the small cracks forming in our lives. But the mundane rhythms began shifting, from late nights to longer stays at home, from innocent dinners to glances I couldn't explain. If only I had heard the silent alarm bells louder then. In those moments, I was caught between trust and doubt, unable to fully voice the fear creeping in, and too afraid to admit I was already losing what I thought was unbreakable. Looking back, I see now how quickly things changed. The laughter dimmed, conversations shortened, the home I once loved began to feel like a fragile illusion. The people around us, my parents, my wife's friends, saw only the surface, the smiles we wore like masks. But inside, I was battling a storm that no one could calm. The tension built quietly, threatening to explode. And soon it would. There's a certain weight to the word family that I never fully appreciated until Darren's presence shattered everything I thought I knew. Darren, my stepbrother, had always been a wild card in our lives. A stranger with a familiar face, unpredictable and reckless. He wasn't someone you could count on, and yet, when he showed up at my doorstep, asking to stay, I found myself torn between obligation and doubt. He had lost his job, again, this time for showing up intoxicated during a work meeting. It was the kind of mistake that couldn't be ignored, and it hit our family hard. My parents had pleaded with me to let him stay, convinced that being close to family might help him find his footing. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe Darren could change. My wife, ever the optimist, agreed without hesitation. I was the reluctant one, silently setting my boundaries. No disturbances, no guests, keep the peace. Darren promised he would respect that, and for a while, it seemed he meant it. He spent his nights out, sometimes until dawn, and kept mostly to himself during the day. I even found myself appreciating small moments. He cooked dinner a couple of times, sat with us, shared stories. But cracks began to appear. The more Darren stayed, the more the atmosphere at home shifted. He stopped going out as much. The late nights turned into longer days at home. I noticed subtle changes, the way my wife and Darren glanced at each other, the way conversations would hush when I entered the room. I brushed off those feelings, telling myself I was imagining things. But deep inside, paranoia ate away at me piece by piece. One day, I came home early from work and found them both there, too close, too comfortable. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced down the rising panic. I confronted Darren quietly, suggesting he figure out his next steps, hoping he would take the hint and leave. He did, but my wife's silence during that conversation was deafening. She said nothing. She didn't defend me. She didn't defend him. She just watched. And that silence? That was the breaking point I couldn't ignore. At night, I lay awake, the image of their closeness burned into my mind. I was caught between love and betrayal, trust and suspicion. The man I called family had invaded the most sacred part of my life, and the woman I loved was no longer the partner I thought I knew. I felt like a stranger in my own home. I wrestled with a flood of emotions: anger, heartbreak, disbelief. But beneath it all, the most painful realization was that sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the deepest. The betrayal wasn't just their actions. It was the silence, the secrets, the shattered trust. Trust is a fragile thing, something I believed in with every fiber of my being until it was stripped away piece by piece. After Darren left, I wanted to convince myself that the nightmare was over, that everything would return to the way it was before. But the silence between my wife and me was heavy, too heavy to ignore. The cracks in our marriage split wider every day. Simple things became triggers: a missed phone call, a late night, a vague excuse. I found myself questioning every word, every glance. Was she hiding something? Was the life we built together a lie? These questions haunted me relentlessly. One afternoon, I came home to find her already there, heads bowed, voices hushed. She hadn't told me she took half the day off. Another time, Darren and she arrived at the same time, explaining they just met outside. Coincidence? I wanted to believe it, but those little moments added up, sharpening the sting of betrayal. I bottled it all inside, afraid to confront the truth, but unable to let go of my suspicions. The weight was crushing. Doubt gnawed at me in the dead of night, hollowing out the trust one once cherished. My heart screamed for answers, but reason whispered caution. No proof, no accusations, at least not yet. Eventually, the tension broke. Over dinner one quiet night, I laid it all on the table. With a trembling voice, I asked the question that filled me with dread. "Is this baby mine?" Her face twisted in anger and shock. She called me cruel, a monster for even suggesting such a thing. The woman I loved transformed in that moment. Her eyes blazing with hurt and fury, the quiet home erupting into chaos. She denied everything vehemently, but the damage was done. The argument spiraled. Words became weapons. I pleaded for honesty. She demanded trust. Between us was a chasm now, too wide to bridge with promises alone. That night, our marriage lay in ruins. I was drowning, distrust warring with love, anger clashing with desperation. The thought of her carrying another man's child was unbearable, like a poison seeping into every corner of my soul. But beneath the rage was a deeper pain, the brutal reality that the woman I gave everything to might have already given herself away. And then she left, without a word, without a goodbye. The moment we found out she was pregnant, my world twisted in ways I never imagined. The timing was off, too close to when Darren lived with us, too soon for the plans we carefully made. I remember holding that pregnancy test in my hands, the weight of it crushing me from the inside out. This wasn't just about a baby. It was proof of a truth I wasn't ready to face but couldn't deny. I wanted to scream, to ask all the questions ringing in my head. But the silence between us was thick, unbearable. She said she wanted to keep the baby, that it was a blessing even if unplanned. Part of me wanted to believe, wanted to hold on to the hope that this was still beneath our roof, a sign of new beginnings. But hope soon turned to agony. Days passed, filled with cold shoulders and bitter words. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was being hidden. Then one morning, she told me, calm and distant, that she had made the decision to end the pregnancy. An abortion, without telling me. I was stunned, speechless, betrayed in ways words can't capture. How could the woman I loved make a decision so monumental without me? The pain was not just about losing that potential life. It was about losing the last thread of trust one had clung to. Her choice felt like a final betrayal, erasing the possibility of repair, of healing. The anger that followed was a wildfire consuming every rational thought. Our home, once filled with laughter and love, became a battlefield of accusations and silence. I called my lawyer that very night, my voice shaking with the weight of heartbreak and fury. She was furious, called me immature for dragging family into something personal. But I didn't care anymore. I needed to protect myself, my sanity, and everything I had built. I reached out to her parents, knowing the consequences this would bring. Her family was devastated, furious even, cutting her off from the inheritance they once promised. I watched as everything she had known began to crumble. Part of me felt sorry, but the larger part was numb, relieved, maybe, that the truth was finally out. Divorce papers were drawn up. Our conversations were reduced to cold legal discussions. The woman I once dreamed a life with became a stranger I barely recognized. Amid this chaos, Darren disappeared, cut off by my father, and by extension by me. But the damage was irreversible. The family I had hoped to protect was shattered beyond repair. The courtroom is a cold place, harsh, unforgiving, a place where raw emotions must wear a mask of reason. But inside, I was a storm of pain, anger, and disbelief as I stepped into that fighting ring called divorce. The woman I once loved was no longer just my wife. She was my adversary. The legal battle was grueling. Each session, each deposition, peeled back layers of our shattered life. Lies, truths, and everything in between. Darren's sworn testimony cut through the silence with brutal clarity. His apology was hollow to me, but to the court, it was a crucial piece of evidence that confirmed what I had suspected all along. I watched my wife struggle as the judge's questions pierced her carefully constructed facade. Her stories faltered under oath. Inconsistencies emerged, eroding whatever sympathy might have remained. The woman who once screamed at me for doubting her was now trapped in a web of her own making. What made it worse was the emotional chaos that engulfed me outside the courtroom. Friends I thought would stand by me grew distant. Family members whispered fears of broken bonds and lost future celebrations. Every text, every phone call from my ex was a reminder of promises broken and dreams shattered. And then came the pictures, intimate, undeniable proof of their affair. Images that stole my breath away, images that cemented the reality I dreaded. I carried those photos with me, not to fuel anger, but to remind myself why I couldn't settle for anything less than justice. But justice is complicated when emotions run so deep. My wife fought fiercely for alimony, hoping to claim a portion of what I'd built. But with evidence stacked against her, her position weakened. Settlement talks were tense, filled with silent grudges and veiled insults. In the end, she conceded, give up the alimony, take only what was hers by right. It was a bitter victory, laced with relief and sadness. Meanwhile, Darren vanished from our lives, cut off by my father, and rightfully so. Yet, months later, news reached me that they had rekindled their relationship in secret. That sting cut deeper than any legal battle. The thought of seeing them together again, both indifferent to the ruins left behind, was almost too much to bear. Through all this turmoil, I realized that pain could be a teacher. As I sat at countless hearings and settlement negotiations, I learned about strength, the quiet strength to walk away from betrayal and rebuild without bitterness consuming me. The aftermath of betrayal and divorce is a wilderness, a lonely, rugged terrain where every step feels uncertain. When the dust settled and the legal battles were behind me, I was left with a void the size of a universe inside. The familiar life I once knew was gone, replaced by silence and memories that stabbed sharper than any wound. At first, mornings were the hardest. Waking up alone in an apartment filled with echoes of what used to be, I was haunted by the question, how could everything fall apart so completely? The betrayal was not just about the broken vows. It was about losing the future I had envisioned, the dreams that felt stolen. But within that pain, something else emerged, an ember of resilience, a flicker of hope. Friends who had seemed distant before returned, reaching out with quiet support. My dad, once a spectator to our family's unraveling, became my rock, reminding me that family is not just defined by blood, but by those who stand by you through the storm. Even Darren's absence was a cruel relief. The man who had from the start been a source of chaos was finally cut loose. I found myself reaching beyond my comfort zone, joining support groups, reconnecting with old passions, and slowly learning to find joy in the everyday again. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of loneliness threatened to pull me under, but each time I chose to stand, to rebuild, to believe in a better tomorrow. This journey wasn't just about healing from heartbreak. It was about rediscovering who I was beneath the pain, learning to forgive, not for their sake, but for my own peace, embracing strength that I didn't know I had. And as the months passed, I realized that endings can be beginnings in disguise. While the scars remain, reminders of what was lost, the future holds new possibilities. I'm not the same man I was before, but maybe that's a good thing, because growth, even from the deepest wounds, can lead to the most profound strength. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you've ever faced betrayal, heartbreak, or the pain of rebuilding, I hope my journey offers some light in your darkness. Life doesn't always turn out the way we plan, but with courage and support, we can find our way forward. Please share your thoughts or similar experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you found this story meaningful, remember to like and subscribe for more. The journey of healing is never easy, but it's always worth it.